So last week I didn't get to make a video, so I had to work over the weekend. Fun. Anyway, I wanted to do a Gaslands build, but my resin 3D printer is down for a few days because I broke it, and I'm waiting for the parts. So in the meantime, we're going to work on something for parts we do have, and I had the wild idea, we're going to make a distillery, or a bootlegger's facility here. We're just going to use, these are champagne party poppers. These used to be in every gas station. I haven't seen them, you can get them online, they're really cheap. They've got a label on them and a cover, and you pull the string and confetti comes out, and they're wonderful. And then just use whatever sort of barrels you have. There's an old GW one out of the Bits box. There's a 3D printed one I did. Of course, we've got our guy here for scale. We're going to use some wire, some matchsticks, some pieces of basswood, of course coffee stirs, maybe we're going to use wood dowel to form the wire. And we're going to make some corrugated bits with a corrugator. And I found my tube bringer, my good one. And this is the one from Gill Mechanical. And I highly recommend these, because this will work with well, not necessarily chipboard, but you know, the heavy drink carton paperboard, and as well as tin foil or whatever, you know, thin aluminum you want to put in there. So it works really good. So, and then we're going to base it on some of our mat board that we use with the sanding sealer to seal it. This is a piece I had done already, so it sort of dictated the size of the project. So we're going to build up the actual still, and then we're going to build a building with it. So first we're going to cover this with some cards, so let's get started on that. So we're going to cover this sort of boiler to make it look not so much like it's an old party popper. We're going to take some card and cover that up. What I did was I wrapped this around a much smaller spindle, in this case a piece of wood dowel, to sort of give the paperboard that memory of, hey, I want to be in a circle. So we will see how we can attach that with various glues. Probably super glue, but if that doesn't work, then we'll fall back 10 and punt. So let's get started with that. Okay, so the super glue actually works way better than I thought it would. So I'm going to continue gluing little areas here until we get all the way around to there, and then we're going to cover that up with a seam and maybe some rivets. So we'll just very carefully apply some super glue and kind of tighten that around there. Alright, so we'll do that until it's all on. Okay, so that went on pretty well. So I'm going to trim a piece to go over that, and although that'll be kind of in the back, so you could leave that off. And if you were a little better about cutting it than I was, it would meet up and there wouldn't be a gap there anyway. So I'm going to trim that on and glue it on, and then we'll go to the next step. Alright, so there's our seam. And I think what I'm going to do is take our 1/16 hole punch, and we'll make some rivets and add to that. That'll be a later step, because we're going to add the door to the burner and some other pieces that'll probably need some rivets too. So the next thing I'm going to do is take a hobby knife and try to scrape these mold lines, which I probably should have done before I glued on the other pieces, or the covering. If you just kind of hold that at a 90 degree angle or thereabouts and kind of scrape it, that'll get rid of most of that mold line to the point that it won't really be noticeable, depending on how you paint it. Alright, so we'll get all those and be back. So those lines are all scraped. I think what I'm going to do is add rivets, because I'm stupid, along the top and bottom, kind of to show how that's all constructed, and then along that seam. So I'm going to punch those out and start gluing them on. So after some technical difficulties, I managed to get some rivets on there. So I'm going to put some more around the top of here. And we punched a bunch out, and you want to punch a bunch extra because some of them won't work, some you'll lose, all that good stuff. So I just take a little bit of, knock that over, super glue, and just take a little toothpick, just put a little, oops, put it up here where you can see it maybe, and actually get some glue on the toothpick. There we go. And you don't want to overdo it with the glue. And then that'll kind of grab that. And then you just do that all the way around, you know, those little bits. And then once we get ready to paint this, we're going to prime it with some Mod Podge and paint. That's going to seal that and make that extremely resistant to abrasion or moisture or explosions, whatever. And anyway, I'm going to put more of those on there and we'll be back. And I just want to show, if you don't have some super glue or don't want to use it for whatever reason, you can use PVA. Just put a very, very small dot down and then put your rivet down like we did with the super glue. It doesn't grab it quite as well, but it does hold it. And as long as you don't really jostle it for a little bit, it'll set up really well. And once it dries, it's just as good as the super glue. So you can use whatever you have on hand, basically. So we'll be back. All right, so there's our rivets, all done along the seam and all along the top and the bottom. I'm going to add a little door. And I've done the same thing. I've cut it out of that card, or the drink carton, and turned that around that spool so that it wants to be curved. And we're just going to glue it on there, and I'm going to glue a little piece of toothpick. Pick it up with the knife here. We're just going to glue that on there as a hinge, and maybe we'll make a little handle or something. So we'll just glue that on. And I think for this we can, well, destroy everything. Use PVA. Maybe get it up where you can see it. Get a good amount in there. Okay, and then we'll try and kind of wipe off that excess. There we go. And then we're going to add our hinge and probably a handle, and we'll be back. Alright, so there's our hinge and a little handle, and the way that split was kind of interesting. It was completely unintentional, but it works really well. So I'm going to let that set up for a little bit, and then we're going to hit that with some Mod Podge just to kind of protect it all, and we'll be back. Alright, so that's set up pretty well. So we're going to go and add a layer of some Mod Podge with some black paint, just to kind of seal that, and because it's plastic, that gives it something good to stick to, the paint, that is. So let me see if I can make a brush work. Alright, this should work, so we'll give this a go. I'll just kind of apply that on there. You don't have to be super duper neat, but try not to slop it too much everywhere. And try to get a nice even coat if you can. Sometimes that's easier said than done. This brush has not seen better days, so. kind of smear that on there. Anyway, we'll apply that. We'll be back. All right, so while that is drying, we're going to work on some of our condenser line. And this is going to come out of the top and then go in coils down into the middle barrel. So we'll get that set up. I'm also going to use my pin vise to drill a little drill bit to drill a small hole, 2 small holes actually, into the top of this barrel. One in and then one back out. That'll go to our 3rd barrel. So, alright, we'll get that set up and be right back. Alright, so I picked out, and this is steel wire that wrapped the hardware cloth that I used a couple episodes back. I just picked a drill bit out of the pin vise selection that matched the diameter of that, or was a tiny bit larger. And you know, there's a lot of latitude here. You can kind of use whatever wire you've got. Copper wire would be ideal, but I don't have any of that the right gauge. So, but anyway, the point being, just pick out some wire that you're going to use and find a drill bit that's just that large or a little bit larger, and you'll be golden. So what I'm going to do is take this dowel rod, and I was kind of hoping I had a bit larger one. Actually, I'm going to look. I'll be right back. Okay, didn't even need a dowel rod. I've got the handle of this stippling brush that should make a very fine diameter coil. So we're going to leave a section that's straight, and then we're just going to wrap this around and probably about there is good. And then we'll just cut that. I'm totally winging this. Okay, and we'll just sort of bend this so that it comes out of there. Yeah, that's just about perfect. And then we'll drill a little hole in here to put that. And again, this is all just, you just kind of eyeball it and put it together. You could measure, be very precise, and it would probably look even better when you're done, but if you've watched any of my other videos, you know I'm not super good at measurements, so that can be troublesome. I do a lot of stuff by eye. And generally it turns out okay. Okay, so we've got that. See, and that'll go right in there like that. That's perfect. Alright, so I'm going to let that continue to set up. Move that over there. And this 3rd barrel not only will need a spigot, but I'm going to make a stand to have this set on. So we will we'll make it out of matchsticks. And these green light matches are completely dreadful for anything you'd use a normal match for, but the sticks are good and they're fairly cheap. I don't recommend them for starting any kind of a fire. So I just take my hobby knife that probably needs to have a new blade put in it, and we'll just trim off the pieces we don't want. Put those to the side. And again, eyeballing that. There we go. I don't think that was quite, maybe it will be. All right, we'll fiddle with that. I think I'm going to cut that out a little bit on each side so that it slots together. So we'll be back. Alright, so I just cut a little bit, and I don't know how well that's going to show up on camera, out of each one of these so that they kind of slot together. And we'll just super glue that, and then I'll probably angle the feet a little bit so that they're level with the ground. And then the barrel we'll make 2 of these, and the barrel will just kind of sit up on top. So we'll be back. Alright, so here's kind of a test fit of everything. You can see I made a little stand for that barrel. Probably could have been a little better, but it works. We've got all of our condenser lines and all that good stuff. So I'm going to let that dry really well. I didn't glue all these pieces together because we need to prime them and then glue them to the base and all that. So, alright, so I've got the pieces all in their places. I went ahead and glued them down with some PVA and put some ground cover on because it's kind of snug up against them and it might be a pain later, especially underneath the barrel, to get that in there. So I'm going to let that set up really good. Then I'm going to do the rest of the ground cover, well, some of it. We still need to build the superstructure over this and all that, so I guess that'll actually be the next step once we clear off the excess ground cover. Alright, so I also added kind of a cover on top of that barrel just to kind of break up the metallic nature of that. Once we paint it, that'll be an aged wood, and that'll add a little bit of visual interest, hopefully. Alright, so I revised my plan. I realized that the freestanding structures I was going to glue to the base, once they were on, would cover up most of the interesting bits on the model. So instead, I'm going to put up fencing on 2 sides, and this will butt up against a building or some other feature and kind of be part of that. So that'll kind of preserve all of the work that we do to put color on this and everything. You'll be able to see it. And so that'll look a little better, I think. Alright, so I'm going to wait for this to dry a little bit, and then we'll get to priming. So now we've got that primed, and that kind of pulled everything together a little better. And so we're going to put some more paint on these things and see what we can do. First thing we're going to do is paint the boiler, and I'm going to use about a 50-50 mix of black and silver. And I just add a little bit of water and mix those together. So we will apply a little of this. Maybe up here where you could see it. And the biggest thing is just be neat enough not to get it down on the ground cover, although that'll be painted last. So if you do, not the end of the world. Alright, so let's put some more color on that. Alright, so let's stipple on maybe some blue on this barrel. Probably need a better brush for that. There we go. Alright, so we'll get that and be right back. Alright, so we've got some blue stippled on there for the barrels. We're going to go back and highlight some of the boiler, probably add a little bit of rust, and then we'll start working on the lines and the wood. Alright, and for our highlights we're going to go the 50-50 mix of pewter gray and some silver. And like before, we just added a little bit of water, mix that together. We'll just go lay it in on all the kind of high spots. And definitely less is more for the effect I'm going for. your mileage may vary. If you want it to look fairly new, then certainly more of a bright silver would be appropriate. Alright, so we'll continue on that. Alright, so we stippled on some of that highlight color, and I don't know how well that shows up on camera, but that does give it a definitely aged look. I'm going to add a little bit of brown wash and maybe some rust effects here and there. Then we're going to paint the wood, and then lastly I'm going to do all of the copper tubing. So, be right back. And for our brown wash, I use nutmeg brown. I thinned it out a little bit and mixed it about half and half with some magic wash. So we're going to add that on there. And probably dirty it up nicely. Okay, so you can see that gives it a nice grimy appearance. So we'll do that all over it. Alright, so there's some brown wash applied to the various places that it needed to be. Gave it kind of a grimy, slightly rusty effect. So next up we're going to do the wood, and we'll get that aged, and then we'll start on the ground cover. For the wood, I'm just starting with the Pewter Grey. We're going to kind of overbrush that on. And try to be neat. It's not super critical. You can touch it up if you go over, but if you don't go over, then you don't have to touch up. And we'll do the stand the same way. Alright, so we'll finish that up and be right back. Now that we've stippled on that silver and gray mixture, that's given it a fairly good weather-beaten sort of iron look. So we will continue on. I think next we'll do the wood. We're going to put a black wash on there, and then we're going to dry brush it and bring out that grain. So let's get started on that. So I mixed up fairly rich wash with just some black paint, thinned out a little bit, and then mixed with some water, and then mixed with some magic wash, which is 50-50 water and Future Floor Wax. And the benefit of that is you can run it as thin or as rich as you like, or as you need at the moment. And I apologize, my allergies are kicking in, so okay, so we'll just apply that to all of the wood bits and let that dry. It goes on fairly dark. It'll lighten up as it dries, so we'll be right back. All right, while we're waiting for that to dry, we're going to dry brush the ground cover with some nutmeg brown, and then we'll use some maple sugar tan as a final highlight. So we'll get one of our trusty dry brushes, and it's more of an overbrushing, but helps accentuate the texture. Gives it a nice layered effect, some depth. Alright, so we'll do that and we'll be right back. Alright, so there's that first layer of dry brushing or overbrushing applied. It's pretty subtle. I don't know that it shows up super well on camera. But our next one is going to be maple sugar tan, and that should make it pop a little bit. So let's get a little bit of that. And that definitely has enough contrast to be seen on camera. So, alright, so we're going to do the rest of that, and we'll be back. Alright, so that really made that pop. So I'm going to do the same thing on the wood pieces and see what that does. That's going to be a little more carefully dry brushed as opposed to an overbrushing. And we'll just get in there and lay that on that. And you can see, well, maybe you can on here, it really accentuates that wood grain. Once that wash has gotten in there and made those fibers swell a little bit and then dried, the dry brushing really picks that up. So, alright, so I'm going to do that and the stand, and we'll be back. So that made that pop pretty well. I'm going to work on these pipes, which I'm going to paint as copper. I'm going to start with some hammered copper. It's Vallejo Game Colors, what I happen to have, so any coppery or even gold color in a pinch, if that's all you got, will work pretty well. I think what we'll do is use that as a base, and then we'll use some gold, or some brass rather, as a highlight. And this is very thin. I don't know that it's going to show up. It's so tiny, I don't think it's going to really show up on camera very well. Alright, so we'll work on that and be back. Alright, so we've got the hammered copper, and we put the brass highlight on there. Let me see if we can't... There we go. That probably helps a little bit. Something really dark behind it. It doesn't show up super great on camera, but it is a wonderful copper effect. I'm not going to put a lot of verdigris or anything on it, any corrosion, because this is supposed to be actively in use. If this was something that was abandoned, then I would definitely put some very light, kind of greeny verdigris colors on there. Alright, so next up we're going to try and add the fence bits, and I will probably paint those before trying to glue them on. So we'll work on one of these panels so you can see how I do that. Alright, so like everything else on this project, we started with our iron oxide primer, or red oxide primer, and then I'm going to kind of damp brush on some Pewter Grey, and then after that we will use some Quaker Grey if I can find the bottle. Here it is, just a lighter gray. And then we will add some silver to that for some metallic effects, and then we probably go back and put a few rust spots on it. So let's get started with that. Okay, and as we progressively go lighter and dry brush it more, instead of overbrushing, it'll pick up more of that top of those corrugations and give it a very wriggly tin look. So, alright, so we're going to continue on with that, and we'll be back. You do these, I'm going to do them all at the same time. Do one side, then set that down, go to the next piece, let it dry, and then flip them all over and do them. Otherwise you lay wet paint down, and that's, don't ask me how I know that. Alright, so we got both sides done with the Pewter Grey. Now we're going to go back with some Quaker Grey, or just a lighter gray. Don't want to get stuck up on, hung up too much on specific colors of paint or names. Just use what looks right. And we'll kind of dry brush that on there. That'll start to really make that pop. And I will link at the end of this video, I'll link the video I did about making your own corrugated iron out of paper or cardstock, and so be sure to check that out too. We put on our mid and light grays. I'm going to go back with just a little bit of straight silver and kind of dry brush that on, and that will help give that enough of a metallic appearance that you'll kind of help sell the idea that that's corrugated iron. So we'll finish those and be back. While those are doing their final drawing, I'm going to take the fence posts and go ahead and give them the same treatment I gave the other wood. I'm going to put a little gray on them, then a black wash, and then I'm going to dry brush them. So let me get those done and we'll start gluing them in place. Alright, so painted the fence posts and all of the panels. I went ahead and glued those in, or on rather, with some PVA. Once that firmed up enough, then I glued the panels on. I'm going to let that dry a little bit more, and then we'll add some grass and some tufts and some things from the bit box to sort of add a little life to it. So we'll be back. Okay, and for our tufts, we're going to use, well, I don't know if these are mountain tufts. Some of these I got put in the wrong things. So anyway, we're going to use the dry grass looking ones, and then some Woodland Scenics Harvest Gold static grass. Any kind of deadish sort of looking grass or tufts will work, that's fine. And maybe your wasteland is a little more alive than this one, so then use some green. Just whatever fits is fine. What I do is just lay down a little bit of PVA and then take some of the static grass and kind of push it in there and let that set up a little bit, and then we'll kind of shake off the excess onto, I always do it onto a paper plate so I can kind of capture that and sort of reuse what blows off if I can. Alright, so we'll do some more of those and add some tufts and be back. The tufts I did the same way. I just put down some PVA and you just kind of plunk the tuft down in there. There's various sizes, just use whatever you think looks the best wherever you need it. Pretty easy to use, and they add a lot of life to the piece. Here's our still all set up, ready to go. If you want to learn more about the corrugated iron, then watch this next video coming up that'll be on your screen. And in the meantime, I thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember to like and subscribe. Have a fantastic day.